Bruchim Habayim. I'm Rabbi Sarah Reines, welcoming you to Temple Shaaray Tefila's 5780-2020, something like a sisterhood Seder. I'd like to open this event with a story that takes place at the end of the 20th century, when many of our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, maybe even great-great-grandparents lived on the Lower East Side. Now, this was before the Lower East Side had fancy gyms and award-winning restaurants and boutique hotels, although it did have Katz's Deli and economy candy. So what else did you really need? Well, most of the people who lived at that community at that time were very poor. They worked long hours and scrimped and saved just to be able to save up a little money to have chicken for Shabbat dinner or to give their children a few pieces of gelt for Hanukkah. But Passover was the holiday when they did the most they could with the little that they had. Families would use their beautifully embroidered tablecloths to set the table. They would wear their finest clothes. They would save up to buy meat and all the other delicious dishes that made up a Seder feast. But before all of that, they had to invest a lot of money on another set of kosher for Passover dishes. You see, all of the plates and bowls and serving pieces that they used during the rest of the year would be boxed up so that they could use their plates and bowls and serving pieces that were kosher for Passover for the 8 days of the holiday. Well, it wasn't easy to buy a second set of dishware because, as I mentioned, the people were very poor. And it wasn't easy to store the dishes because people had very little space in their tiny tenements, and it wasn't easy to switch out the ordinary dishes for the kosher for Passover set because that took a lot of physical work. But people did it because it was so important to have kosher for Passover dishes. It showed that you had the ability and the desire to do what needed to be done in order to do what was right, to do what was right for Judaism, to do what was right for God. Well, this is a story about two families, the Yanklowitzes and the Schmenklowitzes. Every year, about a week before Passover, Mr. Yanklowitz would say, "Yetta, it's time to pull out the Passover dishes." And Yetta would say, "Fine, Yitz, you go do it. You know where they are. We don't have enough room for them here, so we store them at the Schmenklowitzes." And Yitz would say, "I would, but my back is aching. It's never ached like this before. Do you think this one year you could do it?" And Yetta would frown and grumble and stomp off to go and make her way to the neighbors, the Schmenklowitzes. Every year, about a week before Passover, Mr. Schmenklowitz would say, "Shana, it's time to pull out the Passover dishes." And Shana would always say, "Fine, Shimmel, go do it. You know where they are. We don't have enough room for them here, so we store them at the Yanklowitzes." And Shimmel would say, "I would, but my head is aching. It's never ached like this before. Do you think this one year you could do it?" And Shana would frown and grumble and stomp off to go and make her way to the neighbors, the Yanklowitzes. Every year, a week before Passover, Yetta Yanklowitz and Shana Schmenklowitz would meet with their boxes of dishware behind the tenement. They would sit on a stoop, nosh on a few of their last chametz cookies, sip a little bit of their Manischewitz wine, and spend time schmoozing and laughing because neither one of them had a second set of kosher for Passover dishes. They were too poor to buy a second set. So years ago, they decided to switch each other's ordinary dishes, pretending they were their own second set of kosher for Passover dishes. Well, their husbands and their children felt proud, believing they were eating off of their very own, very special, very beautiful kosher for Passover dishes. No one felt bad that they didn't have enough money. No one felt guilty that they weren't following the mitzvot. And the two women laughed because of the joy that they had in seeing the joy that their families had, and because they shared a secret that no one else knew. Or so they thought. You see, someone else did know. What Yetta Yanklowitz and Shana Schmenklowitz didn't know was that the rabbi was watching them from the small window in the back of the shul. Every year, about a week before Passover, he, because at that time, rabbis were he's, would take a few sips of Manischewitz wine and nosh on a few chametz cookies, watching as these women, with a little bit of pretending, made sure their families felt proud and happy. And he smiled because he took joy in seeing them bring such joy. And what the rabbi didn't know for sure, but certainly believed, was that God was watching too and smiling. Because in the end, what is far more important than all the rules and all the mitzvot is learning how to make the most you can with the little that you have and to create and share joy, especially on Passover. This lesson rings with particular resonance today, but throughout Jewish history, Jewish women have been expert at making the most they could from the little that they had and doing what needed to be done to make things happen. This is also true of Shaaray Tefila women throughout our 175-year history, long before the wise and wonderful Ellen Saxel became our first woman president. And certainly since then, women congregants have been sustainers, creators, and energizers in every area of synagogue life. Some of them who are watching now established this wonderful tradition of a sisterhood Seder. To you who are watching, I say, I see you, and I thank you. Your contribution is lasting. And now, blessed with the spirit of matriarchs from all generations, we will now begin to enjoy this wonderful event as 12 Temple Shaaray Tefila colleagues and sisters honor the women of our tradition with our 5780-2020, something like a sisterhood Seder. Pour yourself a little Manischewitz, nosh on some chametz treats, and enjoy.
When I was a kid, I both loved and dreaded Passover. I loved seeing all my cousins. I loved sitting at the table and pretending that I was going to drink 4 full cups of wine, and then pretending that I was actually drunk off those cups of wine, as any, kid does. I love, and I continue to love, the foods of Passover, the charoset, the chicken soup, all of it actually. Even though I don't generally eat any meat, I'm a vegetarian. I just love the soup that my aunt makes. It's just delicious. What I don't love is, as a child, what I didn't love was how long the service seemed to be. It started out with so much enthusiasm, and then as the evening wears on, it can seem a little bit long. And it really took me into adulthood to really begin to appreciate the different steps and the different pieces of the service as a whole, to know that we have to tell the whole story, that there are 15 steps to the service, and it's actually quite meaningful to come back after dinner, although I appreciate that we get very, very tired. And tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the first cup, the very beginning of the service. We've sat down, we've passed out the Haggadot, the Haggadahs. I have 4 or 5 over here. There's a very old one that is from my childhood. And then we have a different night, which is more recent. One of my favorites I brought along with me today is the Journey Continues. This is my women's Haggadah from a Seder that I went to when I was in rabbinical school. It was really exciting. And all of these different Haggadot tell basically the same story of our Exodus, and they all begin the same, and that is with the first cup of wine. The first cup of wine blesses the holiday. It blesses the time that we have found to sit at the table and be together. It more than blesses it, it sanctifies it. The blessing tells us that we are entering into a holy space. And the space that we are entering, although it's the same space that we've been living in without a break for the last 2 weeks, with the same people, with the same energy, with the home learning and a lot of computers and the distancing, that now we're entering into a sacred space that's not going to look that different, but will feel different once we have sanctified it, and we sanctify it with the blessing over the wine. I have a recording of it that I'm happy to share with you online. I don't have much of a voice for singing it. Somehow the melody always gets lost. But what I want to bring your attention to is the last verse. That is Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. Blessed are you, our God, who sanctifies the people of Israel, all of us, and these festival days. That these days are set aside They're set aside for reflection of the past, for inspiration for the future. We begin with our being slaves in Egypt, and we end the Seder singing Bashana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim, that we're going to come next year in Jerusalem. And it's pretty exciting. And Jerusalem, again, like everything else, is a fluid concept that can mean anything. It can, in your mind, it could be the mythical Jerusalem of peace, of fullness in the world. And it can be a literal sense that we're going to journey to Jerusalem and hang out. That would be great too. So when you sit down at the table and you raise your glass for the first time, you know that you're sanctifying not just the fruit of the vine, but also the time, the space, the energy that has brought you to this moment. And whether you're sharing it with your most immediate family, or you're sharing it via Zoom or some other technology platform, it's still sacred. And it can be very powerful if we allow that feeling to enter us as we enter into this time. Abraham said, Hineni, I am here, I'm ready to serve God. And as a meditation into the beginning of Passover, I say, Hineni, I am here too. And I am ready to raise my glass with all of you in spirit and bless this Passover season. L'chaim.
Hi, I'm Elena Paull. I'm a member of Shaaray Tefila, and I am also a trained mikveh guide with Immerse NYC, a pluralistic mikveh project run by the JCC of Manhattan. Mikveh, for those of you who may not know, is an ancient Jewish ritual bath, and it involves the practice of immersing in water to mark moments of transition. Now, traditionally, it's a ritual of purification, but my work and the work of Immerse NYC is much more broadly focused. As a guide with Immerse NYC, my focus is on making this ancient ritual relevant and modern, helping all women mark transitions, any kind of transition, with a personally meaningful Jewish ritual that I help them co-create. The modern mikveh experience is about honoring life's transitions in whatever way is most meaningful to us. And I think right now you'll agree that we are certainly in a moment of profound transition, both individually and collectively. What I've learned as a mikveh guide is that Judaism, and the mikveh in particular, offers us so many ways to mark the transitions in our lives and to ground them in meaning and purpose and help us see the sacred in every day. The mikveh is also all about water, so it's fitting to share a short reflection about Urchatz, the ritual hand washing of our Seder, which comes just before we dip herbs in salt water. This year, Urchatz takes on an entirely new meaning. We are all washing our hands constantly. Some of us are singing or humming 20-second clips of our favorite songs. Others might be reciting a favorite poem or watching a clock or just guessing and hoping it's 20 seconds. But however we do it, hand washing has moved from the realm of private practice into an ever-present communal act. It's something we're doing more than we used to because we have to, and it's something that we're all spending a lot more time talking about and thinking about. It is, in essence, no longer private and silent, it's communal. Our Haggadah actually suggests that Urchatz, the Seder's ritual hand washing, is completed silently too, without reciting a blessing. And this strikes me as a little weird, because there is a Jewish blessing for everything, and this is the one moment where we are suggested not to bless. And I wonder if perhaps in directing us to forgo the traditional blessing, our Seder is offering us a breath, a chance to embrace silence as a small way to mark this moment as distinct from all the rest. The ritual of Urchatz is also offering us a chance to reclaim the sacredness of ritual. Silence, it turns out, is a helpful tool for making the ordinary extraordinary. Urchatz also makes me think about hand washing as an act of separation. Right now, we are washing our hands as an act of preservation, not only of ourselves, but also of our entire community. But it's also an act of distancing and removal. We're separating ourselves from the evil outside, we're removing dirt and disease, and we're purifying ourselves, in a sense, from the world around us. So right now, to be safe and to be clean is to be separate. This idea of separation is central to the mikveh too. We go to the mikveh to mark transition and to separate one moment from the rest. And the waters of the mikveh are unlike any of the other waters in our life. It's not like the water that's coming out of our faucets. It's not for bathing or scrubbing ourselves clean, but there is a cleanliness aspect, but it's more in this sort of metaphorical separation sense. We immerse in the water to separate from what was to what is. So whereas right now, our world is to be safe is to be separate, at the mikveh, to be separate is to be holy. And our Judaism teaches us that we have everything we need. Rituals to help us mark moments, silence when we might need it, and blessings when we don't. So I'd like to offer this alternative blessing that while Urchatz might traditionally suggest that we wash in silence, here's an alternative by a woman named Trisha Carlin to help us separate this moment from the rest. And as we wash our hands, we pray, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed is the soul of the universe, breathing us in and breathing us out. May our breaths continue and our health and the health of all be preserved in this time of sickness and fear of sickness. Holy wholeness, we take as much responsibility for this as we can by observing the obligation to wash our hands thoroughly for as long as it takes to say this prayer. Amen.
Hi, I'm Lisser, Assistant Director of the Religious School here at Temple Shaaray Tefila, and I am here to talk about Karpas. Karpas is the third step in our Seder, and it's the moment where we first dip a green vegetable into salt water. So Passover, like many of our holidays, we blend a time of year with a moment of our experience. And this is a moment of both and, joy and sadness. We dip the Karpas, the green vegetable, into salt water to remember the tears of our ancestors. But we eat the Karpas, the first vegetable of the season, to reflect on the rebirth of life. And this moment in our lives, it's sometimes hard to think about rebirth, but that's what this moment is. We're in our homes and we are self-isolating, but we're remembering that life starts again. And so I dip the Karpas in the salt water, and I say the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri ha'adamah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who creates the fruit of the earth.
Chag Sameach. I'm Rabbi Marla Feldman, Executive Director of Women of Reform Judaism. I'd like to reflect for a moment on the section of the Haggadah called the Bread of Affliction. It's the point in our Seder where we break the middle matzah and we think about the suffering, the affliction of our ancestors. In that moment, I think about our foremothers and their journey, the suffering of those who baked that bread, whether it was leavened or not. And so I wrote this reading called the Bread of Affliction. This is the bread of affliction our foremothers baked as they fled the land of slavery. Gathering their children and their possessions, they embarked upon a journey in the wilderness, leading us to freedom. This is the bread of affliction eaten by Hannah, a courageous mother who gave faith and comfort to her 7 sons as they were tortured by Antiochus, a mother martyred along with her children, a heroine of the Maccabean revolt against oppressors. This is the bread of affliction baked by Bruria, wife of the Talmudic sage Rabbi Meir, respected commentator in her own right. This is the bread of affliction coveted in secret by Beatriz de Luna, a secret Jew who fled the Portuguese Inquisition to become Dona Gracia Mendes, the greatest patron and savior of fugitive Jews. This is the bread of affliction for which Regina Jonas lived and died, the first woman ordained a rabbi in Germany in 1935, murdered by the Nazis in Auschwitz. This is the bread of affliction that came to symbolize freedom for Ida Nudel and other prisoners of conscience, the symbol of our people's journey to freedom forbidden by the Soviet aggressors, but never forgotten. This is the bread of affliction prepared in sorrow by today's chained women, the Agunot, trapped between ancient laws and modern realities, unable to sever past ties, unable to move forward. Though many remain unnamed and forgotten, when we partake of this bread of affliction, we remember the sacrifice of our foremothers and honor their memory. Again, Chag Sameach, Let's all stay safe and healthy during this Passover season.
Chag Sameach. RACHTZA is the moment of the Seder where we wash our hands with a blessing. It's a Jewish tradition to always wash our hands and say a blessing before we eat bread of any kind, including matzah, which comes next. In my family, we have a washing cup that my great-great-grandmother brought from Poland to New York in 1905. Our tradition is to walk around the table with a cup and a bowl so that we can spill the warm water from the cup over our hands and into the bowl. I remember my grandmother walking around with the towel on her shoulder and always going to my great-grandmother last. The cup now resides with my aunt in Florida, but she sent me a few pictures, which we're going to put into this video and you'll be able to see. And there's also one of my daughter who presented our family heirloom at a Jewish Heritage Fair at school 5 years ago when she was in 5th grade. There's a traditional blessing, but for tonight I choose to bless with the alternate bracha written by Rabbi Marsha Falk for her feminist book of blessings, Sefer HaBrachot. I wish you all the healthiest and most joyous Pesach. Carry the traditions and the love of your family in your hearts, even if you are unable to be in the same place. Chag Sameach. Tizkor nafshenu et kedushat haguf benetilat yadayim. Washing our hands, we recall to mind the holiness of our bodies, and we ask God to remember to keep us holy and safe and healthy through this ritual of washing hands, and that our bodies will be holy and sacred and healthy through this Pesach and through this whole year. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. This is Rabbi Laurie Katz Braun. Delighted to join you and this community to celebrate Pesach together, even though we are all in our separate homes and finding ourselves in this very new reality. The part of the Seder I was asked to talk about is Maror, which means bitterness. And it seemed fitting because we are all living through this very bitter, very difficult, painful time of health crisis and seclusion and isolation, trying very hard to keep ourselves and our loved ones safe and to simultaneously find connection with others in our community. So there's a whole part of our Seder that deals with this, living through bitterness. And it was actually my favorite of the 4 questions as a little girl, the question about Maror. I'll sing it to you now. Shebechol halelot anu ochlin she'ar yirakot, she'ar yirakot. Halayla hazeh, maror, maharor. Halayla hazeh, maror, maharor. Now, at the time, this was my favorite of the 4 questions because I was just learning Hebrew, and the other questions had an awful lot of new Hebrew words, and this one seemed to have one central Hebrew word, maror, that you just repeated for a very long time. So it was my favorite question, but not because of the meaning behind it. So today I'm going to talk about the meaning behind it. The pshat, or the simple meaning that we all know from having participated in Seders, is that tasting maror, or bitter herbs, reminds us of the bitterness of slavery that our people went through. But what's the deeper meaning behind this? Why do we actually eat these herbs? What does it mean to experience the bitterness of slavery now at a table eating a meal? So to try to answer that question, I actually looked to the wisdom of my own mom, Joy Katz, who gave me an unusual gift when I was getting married 23 years ago. And the gift was a sugar bowl filled with sugar, but it came with another item, which was a lemon. And I didn't understand it when I opened the gift, so I read the note, and it said something like, "May your marriage be filled with sweetness. May you enjoy all the sugar and all the positive aspects of married life, but may your life together also have a tiny bit of sour so that you can all the more so appreciate the sweetness." So I've never forgotten that gift, and it seemed like an important story to share as we were talking about bitterness together. Why would you give someone a lemon for their wedding? And the drash, or the deeper meaning behind that, is that sometimes we don't appreciate the sweetness until we get a little taste of adversity. And I think that has meaning as we talk about bitter herbs in the Seder. And I wanted to share with you actually one of my favorite texts from the Torah that seemed relevant too. And that is from Exodus, the book of Exodus, chapter 23, verse 9. And I'm going to chant it for you actually so we can really hear the meaning. V'ger lo tilchatz ve'atem yadatem et nefesh hager ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. What this means is, you should not oppress the ger, or the stranger, because you know nefesh hager, the soul of the stranger, because you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. So this idea of nefesh hager and knowing the soul of the stranger, it doesn't say, you've seen strangers, you've met strangers. It says you have known the soul of the stranger. It's part of who you are. This experience of slavery and bitterness is something that's in you, and therefore you may never oppress someone else. You may never harm someone else in the way that you were harmed. And so to me, there is something about this moment in the Seder when we take this physical, visceral taste of bitterness that I believe is to help us remember that part of our souls so that we can better empathize with others, connect with others, and in turn help to make the world a better place. So that's my teaching this Passover as we reach this part of the service of the Seder when we taste bitterness, and as we are all living through this bitter, difficult time in our lives. May we all use this tiny symbolic taste of bitterness to remember that part of our souls that understands pain, and may that help us to show deeper empathy to others and the world and continue to reach out to build community and to make the world a better place. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to participate in the Women's Seder at Shaaray Tefila, and I wish everyone a Chag Sameach in our virtual community as we connect in this special way. Thank you.
Hine matov u'manayim, shabtot achot gam yachad. Behold, how good and pleasant it is when sisters gather together. Shalom, sisters. I'm Rabbi Haley Siegel, and it's my privilege to bring you an insight about the Orech, or the Hallel sandwich. The origins of this custom come from the Talmud, one of the earliest sources of Jewish law. According to legend, Rabbi Hallel would celebrate Passover by making a sandwich of matzah, the paschal lamb, and the maror, or the bitter herbs. While our tradition asserts that Hallel innovated this crunchy masterpiece as a means of literally fulfilling a commandment from the book of Numbers, I believe his creation was inspired in large part by personal experience. In the Talmud, we learn about Rabbi Hallel's early days. His life was not easy. He was very poor and worked especially hard to procure the basic necessities. If he had any resources left over, he would use those monies to pay admission to the Beit Midrash, the study house, so he could learn from the great masters of the time, teacher Shemaiah and Avtalion. One week, he simply could not make ends meet for entrance into the Beit Midrash. Being a nimble young lad, he climbed up to the top of the roof so he could hear the lesson. Unfortunately, it was a cold night and Hallel got stranded. The rabbis and students later noticed something obstructing their skylight and were shocked to find a shivering Hallel. They revived him and said, "Wow, this man and all those like him deserve to learn." Hallel eventually reached the highest peaks of respect within the Jewish community, becoming the Nasi, or the president of the Sanhedrin, the chief body of Jewish law. Hallel understood the extremes of life. He tasted the maror, the bitterness and suffering of poverty. He tasted the paschal lamb and matzah, redemption, faith, and hope through his ascendance in academic life and personal contributions to the Jewish community. His story was the Passover story, just as it is ours. For Passover 2020, as we compile our own karechim, our sandwiches, let's call to mind the maror moments of challenge and hardship in our lives. And this year especially, let's put a prodigiously large chunk, like I'm talking about a matzo ball-sized chunk of sweet haroset, into that sandwich to savor our joyous seasons. May our personal histories bring new inspiration to this custom and enable us to continue the chain of connection to our ancestors of long ago. Shalom again, sisters. Rabbi Haley Siegel here, providing you with one more insight, this time about the Shulchan Orech, or festive meal. How interesting that the rabbis use the phrase Shulchan Orech to describe the delicious Passover main course feast and not Seudat HaMitzvah, or mitzvah meal. Shulchan Orech literally means prepared table, and this phrase hints to us that our meal requires so much more than yummy dishes. We need to beautify the physical surroundings of our tablescapes. In my family, we have a special silver covered Haggadah from my grandparents. Do you have family heirlooms or pieces of Judaica that you can bring out? Can you display some meaningful family photos? Are you crafty? If you have children in your household, are they crafty? Can someone who is of an artistic inclination create some homemade decorations? Or for this year, can you think about someone who might be in need of company and help that person tune into your Seder either by phone or technology? For this year's Passover, may our shulchanot, our tables, delight our senses and our souls.
Hi, I'm Emma Krasner, the Adult Programming Intern and the Religious and Cultural Vice President of Tasty, and I want to talk about one of my personal favorite moments from the Passover Seder, and that is when the kids get to look for the afikomen. So one of the traditions that my family has is my grandpa actually hides about 5 different afikomens around the house. Only one of them is real. Each one has a specific note saying if it's real or if it's not. So this makes it a lot more intense when you find one and if you figure out if it's the real one or not. And it also makes us look for a much longer time. But it's really fun getting to watch everybody run around. And one of my favorite memories with this is one year we were at my cousin's house and we were looking for probably a half an hour at this point. All of the other fake ones were found. We only had the real one left. And I was probably about 10 at this time. And my cousin was a little bit older than me. And we finally got a hint that it was going to be somewhere in the front hall. So we figured it was going to be in the front hall closet. So my cousin runs there before me, and every single year I was the most competitive with this, so I always wanted to win. So I knew he was going to grab it before I did, so I actually tried to run and successfully jump on his back in order to get there before him. Luckily I did, and I actually was able to get it right before he could, and I won.
So once we've finished our Passover meal and we have found the afikomen, we are ready to move on to our next section of barech, which means blessing. So you might be saying to yourself, we've been saying blessings all night. And yes, you're right, we have been saying blessings all night. And really, the word blessing is just another word for us to express our gratitude and our awe. And in this moment, in the Seder, we're expressing that gratitude for something that is very basic, but unfortunately not everybody has the ability to do. We are saying that we are grateful for being full, that we were able to satiate our hunger. And that is something we can't take for granted. Now, Jews often say a blessing after a meal. That's not what's unique about this part of the Seder. What is unique about this part of the Seder is that when we say this blessing, we also invite in an invisible guest. Traditionally we invite in Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi. Many modern Seders also invite in Miriam Haniviyah, Miriam the prophetess. These two figures in our sacred stories who we hope will usher in an era, a time where everybody will experience peace and wholeness, that hunger and war won't exist anymore, and where everybody can celebrate in joy and gladness together. Now, when we invite these invisible guests to our Seder table, one thing that I think we can do is keep in mind the many people that you do not see who make it possible for your food to reach your table. Hundreds of people made it possible just so you could eat your meal. From the farmer who's growing the food to the workers who are collecting the produce, to the people who transport your food from the farm to the supermarket to Instacart so that it can be delivered to your door, to the people who are cooking it, whether it's you or your dad or your grandma or your aunt or whoever it is that has cooked your meal. Sometimes we don't remember that we need to invite them to the table to say a very sincere thank you and to express our deepest gratitude for helping us to make sure that we are able to satiate, to satisfy our hunger. And if we can feel that moment of intense awe and gratitude, we will have fulfilled our obligation to bless.
We now come to the Hallel section of our Seder. Hallel is a series of prayers we say during important and joyous moments like Rosh Chodesh, the new month, Sukkot, and Shavuot. Hallel consists of Psalms 113 through 118 and contain words of praise and thanksgiving to God. During our Seder, we actually separate the Psalms of Hallel, which is a little different from the other times we might recite it in the year. Here, we sing or say Psalms 113 and 114 towards the beginning of the meal and reserve the other Psalms for right now, towards the end of the Seder. The song I began with was just the final line of Psalm 115, praising God, a setting by Debbie Friedman, just one verse of Hallel but filled with so much meaning. We now conclude the Hallel section with a line from Psalm 118, Ze hayom asa Adonai. This is the day that God has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I hope wherever and however you're celebrating Pesach this year, you can find some joy and inspiration from the text of Hallel. I hope you'll join in and sing with me from home. Chag Sameach. זה היום, זה היום, עשה אדוני, זה היום, זה היום, עשה אדוני, נגילה ונשמחה, נגילה ונשמחה בו, נגילה ונשמחה, נגילה ונשמחה בו, זה היום, זה היום, עשה אדוני, זה היום, זה היום, עשה אדוני.
Hi, this is Rabbi Sarah Reines, and we've come to the end of the Seder. The Seder concludes with Nirtzah. This is that moment, if you have come back to the table after eating dinner and then going for a little rest in the living room, that you're crossing the finish line. This is that moment when we say or sing Bashana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim. Next year, may we be in Jerusalem, which is not necessarily literal. It's more of a traditional Jewish way of saying next year, may everything be as it should be, for everyone, everywhere. The word nirtzah comes from the verb lirtzot, meaning to wish or to desire. The way nirtzah is often understood in traditional circles is that it's referring to God's desire, so that if you have performed all of the Seder rituals in the way that was expected of you, you've done what God wants. And so your offering is both acceptable and accepted. You've met God's desire. But the literal translation of Nirtzah is, we will have desired, which is an interesting form of the verb. Think back to the vision of everything as it should be. Bashana haba'a b'Yerushalayim, we have made it to a time and a place of complete liberation and wholeness, and therefore we are beyond a place of need or want. We will have desired. To honor this final step in our Passover experience, I'm going to share a new version of a song that many of us might know, Gesher Tsar Me'od. It's based on a quote from the Hasidic master, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. The words as we know them are Kol ha'olam kulo Gesher Tsar Me'od, V'ha'ikar lo lefached klal. All the world is a very narrow bridge. The most important thing is not to fear at all. Well, I've always had problems with this text. Fear is real, and to deny our fear isn't fair, and it isn't healthy. And I actually think it's important that we acknowledge our fear. Interestingly, I've recently discovered that the original text isn't the simple form. Again, we have a verb interpretation. It's not the simple form of the verb lo lefached, which is don't fear, but the reflexive lo lahitpached, which more literally means something like don't fearify yourself. That subtle difference gives the space to understand this teaching differently. Recognize and voice your fear, but resist feeding it. Let's remember, when we feel fear, that we are so much more than that fear. That's only something small that has sort of entered us for that moment. And there's so much more that we're experiencing even at that moment. When fear comes, energize the other impulses that live within us. Strength, humor, love and hope, confidence, friendship, motivation, resilience. We find ourselves in a modern Mitzrayim, this year, secluding ourselves in narrow spaces to protect against what feels like a swirling plague. But while the shape and the timing of our journey toward liberation is uncertain, we are making our way to the other side of fear, to the other side of having a desire or a need. And we're doing so by doing what we did tonight, by continuing to learn and sing and rejoice and recall and voice our fear and celebrate as sisters. The Jewish artist and songwriter Elena Arians composed a version of this song that articulates this Hasidic teaching with an English phrase that, for me, beautifully captures its essence. And so we leave you with Elena, with her wife, Cantor Julia Kadrain, and their younger daughter, Acadia Jean, singing On the Other Side of Fear. Chag Sameach.
The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side of fear. Kol ha'olam kulo, kol ha'olam kulo, gesher tzar, gesher tzar me'od. Kol ha'olam kulo, kol ha'olam kulo, gesher tzar, gesher tzar me'od. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כבר. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כבר. כל העולם כולו, כל העולם כולו, גשר צר, גשר צר מאוד. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כבר. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כבר. The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side of fear. Kol ha'olam kulo, kol ha'olam kulo, gesher tzar, gesher tzar me'od. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כבר. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כבר. We love you. Mwah. Be strong out there.